I'm going to do a little talk now about Sophie Scholl and the White Rose movement in the Second World War, which has a lot of relevance in modern times. And I can relate a lot to it. Sophie Scholl was born Sophia Magdalena Scholl on May 9th, 1921, in the German town of Forchtenberg. Her mother was Magdalena Scholl, and her father was a liberal politician, Robert Scholl, who was also the mayor of the town. He was a staunch critic of the Nazis. Sophie was one of 6 children and was brought up as a member of the Lutheran Church. In 1930, the family moved to Ludwigsburg and then 2 years later to Ulm, where her father had a business consulting office. In 1932, she attended an all-girls boarding school and at the age of 12 joined the Hitler Youth Movement, as most young people were encouraged to do at the time. However, she soon became very critical of its motives. She was a talented artist and began to associate with artists of the degenerate school of art, a specific movement in Germany. And the artist Otto Eicher helped her with her sketching and edited her work. She was also a keen reader, especially of philosophy and theology. It was people like him, Eicher, that inspired Sophie. At the age of 16, she was first arrested by the Gestapo after her brother Hans was found to be active in an anti-Nazi group. Sophie was released the same day. Her brother Werner and sister Inga were jailed for a week and Hans for 3 weeks. After leaving school in 1940, she started to work in a kindergarten, hoping this would exempt her from National Labour Service. However, it did not, and she spent 6 months as a nursery teacher in Bloomberg. It was run on military lines, and this led Sophie to think more on passive resistance. After her National Labour Service, she enrolled in Munich University, where her brother Hans was already studying medicine. He introduced her to his circle of friends who shared a love of art, music, literature, philosophy, and theology. Hiking in the mountains, skiing and swimming were also some of their activities, as well as attending concerts, plays, and lectures together. In the university, she met a number of artists, writers, and philosophers, including Theodor Heike, who was a writer and translator of works by Soren Kierkegaard, and Cardinal Newman. He was also a staunch anti-Nazi campaigner and was connected to the White Rose movement. Other influences on Sophie were Cardinal Newman, Catholic Bishop Clemens August Graf von Galen, who led Catholic protests against Nazism, Karl Muth, and Kurt Huber, who made Hans and Sophie aware of the persecution of the Jews. He joined the White Rose and was the author of most of the sixth pamphlet. Sophie sent a copy of 2 of Cardinal Newman's sermons to her boyfriends, Fritz Hartnagel, to the Eastern Front, where he was assigned, and he wrote back, "We know by whom we are created, and that we stand in a relationship of moral obligation to our Creator. Conscience gives us the capacity to distinguish between good and evil." And this is a paraphrase of Newman's sermon, The Testimony of Conscience. The White Rose movement was led by 5 students and 1 professor. They were Willy Graf, Kurt Huber, Christoph Probst, Alexander Schmorell, Hans Scholl, and Sophie Scholl. It was a non-violent movement, and its main activity was the distribution of leaflets opposing the Nazi regime and its treatment of Jewish prisoners. It had many supporters in Germany, belonging to a variety of religions and political affirmations, affiliations. One member, Traut Lafrenz, was a follower of Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy, while Eugene Grimminger was a Buddhist, followed the Buddhist religion. Christoph Probst was baptized a Catholic only shortly before his execution. His father Hermann was a Catholic, but also a private scholar of Eastern thought and wisdom. So the white rose is meant to represent, amongst other things, purity and innocence in the face of evil. We must remember that even in modern times, where things are so difficult at the moment. Think of the white rose. It's like in the East you have the white lotus, similar symbol. Purity, like I say, compassion and love. So they distributed 6 pamphlets in total. The first 4 were produced by Hans Scholl and Alexander Schmorell, who had learned of the mass murder in Poland and the Soviet Union. They were distributed from June to July 1942. Sophie contributed when she realised it was her brother who was involved. These leaflets were left in telephone booths, telephone books, mailed to professors and students, and taken by courier to other universities for distribution. The pamphlets were hard-hitting against the Nazis, and quotes were used from the Bible and various German philosophers. One quote from the writer George Philipp Friedrich Freiherr von Hardenberg, who used the pen name Novalis, which better if I just use that. He lived from 1772 to 1801, was, "Blood will stream over Europe until the nations become aware of the frightful madness that drives them in circles. And then, struck by celestial music and made gentle, they approach their former altars altogether, hear about the works of peace, and hold a great celebration of peace with fervent tears before the smoking altars. Only religion can reawaken Europe, establish the rights of the peoples, and install Christianity in new splendour visibly on earth, in its office as guarantor of peace." Of course, we can extend that to other religions. Obviously, at the time when Novalis was alive, he only knew about Christianity. But other religions like Buddhism, Hinduism, etc., Jainism, also have a place in spreading peace, as does Theosophy, of course, with its universal brotherhood of humanity, regardless of race, creed, sex, caste, and colour. It's very, very important to remember that is the most essential thing in the world, to promote this brotherhood. That's why I say it so much. So the quote can readily be applied to the current state of the world, with a wider application than just referring to this Christian religion. Despite the traumatic events in the modern world, there are many, like the White Rose movement, campaigning for peace. All through history, there have been these courageous people campaigning for peace in the face of violence and persecution. I'm reminded of the Bengali poetess Lal Ded, one of my favourites, or Laleshvara, who lived from 1320 to 1392 CE. And she wrote, "I saw a sage starving to death, a leaf floating to earth on a winter breeze. I saw a fool beating his cook, and now I'm waiting for someone to cut the love cord that keeps me tied to this crazy world." I absolutely love Lal Ded, her poetry is just, to me, it's just wonderful. It's always very short, but it's hard-hitting. She was amazing. So this suggests that despite the cruelty she sees around her, she still loves the beauty of the world. But she can't exile from her mind, even though she needs to progress spiritually. It's something many of us can identify with. But while we are here, we can do what we can to alleviate at least some of that suffering. The famous diarist Anne Frank, who died in Auschwitz, suggested similar. It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals, because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them, because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I found that there is always some beauty left in nature, sunshine, freedom, in yourself. These can all help you. So even though she died in Auschwitz, we have these beautiful words to remind us of her and to remember what she did. Bringing up to modern times, the Norwegian band Calandra stated in their excellent song, The State of the World, "It may be naive, but I must believe. Inside every human, there's kindness still." And that's something we have to try and believe. It's not always easy to believe that with some terrible things that go on in the world and some people who are obviously following an evil path. But we somehow have to try and see the best in everyone. I mean, because obviously if we see the worst in people, we're just increasing that evil within them, as I've said many times. It's not easy. And maybe we can't love everyone, but we can at least try not to hate them and try and do what we can to bring a bit of love, peace and harmony into the world in our own way. Open your heart. Let your heart open and let it be full of love and light and peace and harmony. Let's be a force for good. So the White Rose movement showed extreme courage in defying the Nazi regime. Whilst actually living in Germany, they didn't move out of Germany and do it from a distance. They were actually in Germany. They knew they were taking a great risk in what they were doing and would very likely be captured and executed. Sophie and the rest of those in the White Lotus movement could be defined by words that H.P. Blavatsky wrote in her article, The Last Song of the Swan, regarding Sister Rose Gertrude, who set off to help the lepers in a place called Molokai, which is near Hawaii, I think. Incidentally, she never did, but that's another story. I'm not going to tell that story at the moment. But Father Damien, who was also mentioned, he did fulfill his promise. The words can apply very much to Sophie and other members of the White Rose movement and many people in the world today. She said she is the rare manifestation of a higher ego, free from the trammels of all the elements of its lower one. Influenced by these elements only so far as the errors of her terrestrial sense perceptions with regard to religious form seem to bear a true witness to that which is still human in her, in her personality, namely her reasoning powers. Thence the ceaseless and untiring self-sacrifice of such natures to what appears religious duty, but which in sober truth is the very essence and ess of the dormant individuality, divine compassion, which is no attribute, but verily the law of laws, eternal harmony, Eliah's self. It is this compassion crystallized in our very being that whispers night and day to such as Father Damien and Sister Rose Gertrude. Compassion speaks and saith, "Can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry?" Yet personality, having been blinded by training and religious education to the real presence and nature of the higher self, recognizes not its voice, but confusing it in its helpless ignorance with the external and extraneous form, which it was taught to regard as a divine reality, it sends heavenward and outside instead of addressing them inwardly. Thoughts and prayers, the realization of which is in itself S-E-L-F, capital S-E-L-F, the higher divine self. It says in the beautiful words of Dante Gabriel Rossetti, but with a higher application, For lo, thy law is past, that this my love should manifestly be to serve and honour thee. And so I do, and my delight is full, accepted by the servant of thy rule. So on February the 18th, 1943, Hans and Sophie went to Ludwig Maximilian University to distribute leaflets. After distributing most of them, Sophie flung the last remaining leaflets from the top floor into the atrium. The university caretaker, Jacob Schmid, witnessed this. He was a member of the Nazi Party and reported them to the Gestapo. Sophie, Hans and Christoph Probst were arrested and interrogated. Robert Moore, the Gestapo investigator, at first thought Sophie was innocent, but when she learned her brother Hans had confessed, she assumed full responsibility for everything to protect other members of the White Rose movement. What an incredible act that was. She could have been let free because the interrogator thought she was innocent. But instead of being set free and leaving and saving herself, she took on full responsibility for everything. Of course, sadly, it didn't help all of them, but it was an incredibly brave act. During the trial, Sophie is reported to have said, "Somebody, after all, had to make a start. What we wrote and said is believed by many others. They just don't dare express themselves as we did." The silent majority. Same in the world today. A few people show great courage. Most people don't want to get involved. What's that saying? All it needs for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing and good women do nothing. On the 22nd of February 1943, Sophie, Hans and Christopher were found guilty of treason and sentenced to death by guillotine. Only 4 days after their capture, Sophie was executed at 5 p.m., Hans at 5:02 p.m., and Christopher at 5:05 p.m. Sophie was only 21 years old. Other members of the White Rose movement were eventually executed as well. Else Gebel remembers the last words Sophie said to her as, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give himself up, or herself up, individually, to a righteous cause? It's such a splendid sunny day, and I have to go. How many of us have to die on the battlefield in these days? How many young, promising lives? What does my death matter? If by our acts thousands are warned and alerted, among the student body, there will certainly be a revolt." I don't know whether there was a revolt of the student body at the time, but of course, in the Vietnam War, later, decades later, there were a lot of protests against the Vietnam War. Peaceful protests, the protests all over the world, in China, Tibet, and even now there are protests against war going on, protests against the war in Gaza, Ukraine, and many other places. There are always people trying to bring peace, love and harmony to the world. So her very last words were reported to be either, "God, my refuge into eternity," or "the sun still shines." And I remember the executioner saying that he'd never seen anyone so calm and composed as she went to her death. So in more enlightened times, these executions are regarded as judicial murder. She left a lasting legacy. After her death, a copy of the 6th leaflet was smuggled out of Germany through Scandinavia to England. In mid-1943, the Royal Air Force dropped millions of propaganda copies of this tract over Germany, now retitled The Manifesto of the Students of Munich. Many local schools, as well as countless streets and squares in Germany and Austria, have been named after Scholl, Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans. Also, books, films and plays have been produced about her life. On the 22nd of February 2003, the anniversary of her execution, a bust of Scholl was placed by the government of Bavaria in the Valhalla Temple in her honour. She was only the 5th woman to receive that accolade. And I'll finish with a poem I wrote about Sophie called The White Rose. She still looks out from photographs as if everything was still as it should be, as if nothing would ever change. Dreams stolen in the midst of time. Her heart felt love and compassion. Her inner self spoke to the darkness, and light filled her awakened being. She did not falter in her steps, did not cry to the empty sky. Her soul saw the suffering around her, and the spirit moved in her to confront the evil all around. Betrayed by a heart as cold as ice, she walked amongst the soulless until she found her way to the light, shining in a heaven she made until she walks this earth again. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings. May we always work towards this peace, love and harmony in the world, because at the moment that's all that matters. Loving kindness, friendship, hope, optimism. And we can learn a lot from Sophie Scholl and her brother Hans and all the White Rose movement. We may think that it's something in the past, but it's never in the past. It's always here now, right here now with us, in our hearts and our souls and our minds. In the love that we feel for our fellow human beings. Namaste. The divine in me greets the divine in you. Until we meet again. My brothers and sisters, I love you all.